Okay, so far, Wittgenstein has been trying to counter the idea that the meaning of the word is the object it refers to, that its meaning is reference. Um, and hopefully he's convinced you of that, or I don't know. Um, I'll let you decide whether he's convinced you of that. Let's turn to the idea of rules in private language. This is a very key argument in his investigations, at least most people think so. It's super famous. Practically every philosopher alive today has some interpretation of this. And a lot of them are very bad, by the way. In my opinion, I think a lot of people completely miss the point of it. I'm going to do my best to try to describe what he's getting at with this. One thing that pretty much everybody does agree with is, in terms of interpretation, is Wittgenstein is definitely arguing that a private language is impossible. All right. A private language is impossible. You can't have one. Why? Well, that's the big question. Okay. And in order to discuss this notion of private language, Wittgenstein chooses something kind of internal and personal, pain. So he says, how do people learn to speak of sensations like pain? Kind of maybe for an obvious reason. I mean, a door or a chair or something you can point to, that's a public thing. What is a private thing? You know, what's something private? Well, pain is pretty private, right? I can't feel your pain. You can't feel my pain. Maybe that's a private thing. How do we talk about something that's private? And can we talk about it with a private language? The first thing he has to say about this is that we learn new pain behavior. Speaking replaces crying. Kind of a hint of the direction he's going in. In other words, when you're a young baby, you just cry when you're in pain, and then you learn later on to attach words to that and say, ouch, that hurts! Speaking replaces the crying. All right, he says, only I know I am in pain. And he says, this is either false or it's nonsense. Now, nonsense means a word with no meaning. It's senseless, makes no sense at all. So it depends on how you take that sentence. If you take it in one way, it's certainly false. It's false because people usually know when you're in pain. Okay, I said often, but usually they know you're in pain. I mean, if you see someone get hit by a car and fly like 20 feet in the air and land and their leg snaps in half, do you walk up to that guy and say, well, only he knows if he's in pain or not? Bullshit. I mean, that's ridiculous. Of course not. You know the guy's in pain. Most of the time, when people are in pain, it's really hard to hide pain. That hiding pain and lying about pain is a learned behavior. The default is that people express their pain, and sometimes they can't hide it at all. So it's completely false that you don't know if somebody's in pain or not. Which, by the way, who is he talking to? Remember Russell and his acquaintance and description things? Pain would be a description because you can't understand other people's mental states. That's something you only know about yourself, as he said. It's your own mind by acquaintance. Other people you only know by description. Wittgenstein's like, no, you know when other people are in pain. Now the nonsense thing though is really about the word no, because if you put the word no in there, it's supposed to have some important philosophical consequence. It doesn't. I mean, I am in pain. What difference does that? There's no real difference between saying I'm in pain and I know I'm in pain. And the reason for that is, can I doubt that I'm in pain? Can I have second thoughts about, am I in pain or not in pain? I don't know. No, I know I'm in pain. So a question of, if you're trying to say that there's some special thing that you know, it doesn't make any sense to say that, because there's no question of being wrong. There's no doubt. And I think that has a lot to do with this whole argument, by the way, is there has to, in order to make a claim of, that you know something, you have to make it, it must be possible to say that you don't know it. I mean, otherwise, it doesn't make sense to say you know something. All right, why can't a dog simulate pain? Why can't a dog fake being in pain? Is he too honest? And by the way, yeah, you can train your dog to whimper or something, but he's not trying to fake it, right? He's not trying to deceive you. And his answer is, lying is a language game, and the requisite surroundings aren't there. Lying is something only human beings can do with language. Dogs don't have the language to lie about their pain. All right, he says the philosopher's treatment is like the treatment of a disease. That's something I'm going to have to come back to. All right, let me continue on for a little bit here. All right, could one name a sensation all by oneself? Okay, so here's the kind of thought experiment that's supposed to prove that a private language is impossible. And he says, a great deal of stage setting is necessary. A word needs a post where it is stationed. This goes back to the idea that words only take place in activities and in context. It needs a place. And it needs a use. What use would it have? And how would that use be accomplished? Again, words have to be embedded in a activity, a context, and have a use. Without that, they're not going to mean anything. Okay, so suppose here's the thought experiment. So suppose I get a diary and I make a note of a sensation. Whatever, you know, I have a little tickle in my side every once in a while. I'm going to call that E. Well, depending on your translation, sometimes it says S. But anyways, whatever. I'm going to call that E. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So every time I have this little tickle in my side, sensation, I'm going to call it E, and I'm going to record it in my diary. I'm going to say, on, what day is it? May 1st, 2020, I had E. And next time I have it, I'm going to write down the date and the time. And the next time I'm going to write down the date and the time. And I'm going to record every time I have this sensation. It's my private word, because I'm not going to tell anybody about it. It's my private sensation and my private word. No one knows what E means when I write it in my diary but me, all right? And I'm not going to share that with anybody. Is this going to make sense to do this? And his first observation about this is, he says, what is the criteria of correctly identifying it? Now, this is where a lot of people go sideways on this thing, because they're like, of course, I always, if it's the same sensation in my side, that little tick, I'm going to know that it's the same from time to time to time. Well, perhaps, all right. But, you know, but particularly over time, how sure are you of that? I mean, it's one thing if it's a week later, you have the same tickle and you write it down. It's another thing if it's like a year and a half later and you're like, oh, there's E again. Are you sure it's the same thing you had a year and a half ago? Are you sure about that? The problem here is that there's no criterion for identifying it correctly, because if you're sure, then you're sure. That is, whatever seems right is right. And in other words, you can never be wrong. So if I think it's the same as it was a year ago or 2 years ago, it's the same thing, because I'm the only one making the judgment, and whatever seems right to me is going to be right. And this is why it can't be a word. Okay? It's called rules in private language. Well, because when you use a word it must follow a rule. Wittgenstein calls it grammar. By the way, everybody calls it grammar. Wittgenstein's notion of grammar is a little more expansive than the thing you learn in English class, but it's kind of the same idea. Words have rules. And the key idea of, you can't have a rule that you can't break. There's no such thing as a rule that cannot be broken. The whole thing that makes it a rule is that you can do it right or you can do it wrong. I mean, either you're following the rule or you're not following the rule. In this case, there's no such thing as not following the rule. Every word is like this in the language. You can't just use words for anything you want to use them for. There are rules for how you use a word and how not to use a word. And I mean, just think about that. It's certainly true. All right, it's certainly true. So he says, don't consider it a matter of course that making a mark is making a note. For a note has a function, a use, and E has none. That's another problem here. Not only is there no criteria for deciding whether you're using it appropriately or not, it has no use. Words have to have some kind of function. They have to have some kind of use. And then he says, further, sensation and even has and something belong to our common language, apart from which they mean nothing. In other words, the whole way you're thinking about this word E, by the way, called private language, we got one word. Can we even have one word that we're making up all by ourselves, that's totally private? Not even a word, not even one word. And when we're trying to even think about how we're going to assign some meaning to that word, we're using English words in our common language to try to think about how we're doing that. And so, I mean, that already dispels the idea that it's a private language. All right, so he says, what if this E, the sensation, is accompanied by a rise in blood pressure? Now, this is very telling because that would be a public objective criteria. So this is what compared to the idea that you just decide for yourself when you're having E and when you're not having E. Now there's some way to check. Okay, so I'm getting that little tickle. Okay, I'm gonna check. So I got it. Do I have E? So I check my blood pressure, and it's high. So I'm like, oh wow, I'm having E. And then a couple days later, I have that same sensation, and I'm like, oh, there's E again. I check my blood pressure, and it's not high. And I think, wow, I thought I was having E, but I'm not. This belies the whole idea that you could identify the sensation correctly every time, because that's absolutely plausible that would happen, right? So when earlier you might have been thinking, oh, bullshit, I can always tell. I can always tell when I'm having this particular sensation. Well, think about this case where you're like, oh, I think that's the same thing, and then you check and it's not. Now there's a criteria of identity. Now you realize you can't just kind of, whatever seems right is right, it's not going to work, right? All right. So that makes it clear that there's no difference whether I identify it right or not. In my mind, that is. It's now we have an objective criterion. And that's fine, by the way. Other people could check your blood pressure. This is not private any longer. It wouldn't be private any longer in that case. So he says, perhaps some people see color differently. What an interesting thought. color, you know, it's a wavelength of light. What if every time I saw red, you saw blue, and every time I saw blue, you saw red? How could we ever tell? And the answer is we could not. There's no way, because if I point to the same thing and I say, that door is blue, and you say, yeah, that door is blue, even if I'm seeing it the way you see red, we're labeling it the same thing, we're calling it the same thing. And so there'd be no discrepancy. We would not ever know that we're actually in our head visualizing it differently. It doesn't make any difference. That is to say the word is public, right? The private experience, whether I'm seeing it red or blue in the same way as you, who cares? The thought that we're trying to apply to this is the door is blue, and I say that's true, and you say that's true. Hey, that's all there is to it. There's no dispute. We didn't experience it the same way. We'll never know that we experienced it differently because we had the same judgment in language. I hope you're kind of wrapping your mind around the importance of this discussion. It's all about language and how we make judgments in the world. It's not private. All right, let's see. He says, but you can only say of human beings that they have sensations and are conscious. And then he has in quotes, this is one of those quotes things, he says, but in fairy tales, the pot can see and hear. And his comment in response to that is, it can also talk. All right, another argument he uses is the beetle in the box. I'm going to kind of blow through this a little quickly. This is the idea, everybody has a beetle, and it's not really a beetle. Whatever, something, beetle, in quotes, you know, whatever it is. Everybody has this little thing in a box, like a matchbox, say, and you put it in your pocket. Everybody has this little object in a box in your pocket. Sometimes you show people their box, but you never, ever show anybody your beetle. So no one knows anybody else's beetle. I could have a marble, and you could have a BB, and somebody else could have a thumbnail, whatever. So everybody has different things in their box. And we talk about our beetles, whatever those little things are, all the time. And his point of this is that it wouldn't matter what the thing is in the box. We just talk about it. It's what we say about it that makes any difference. And this is similar to expressions of sensation. So maybe you can't feel my pain, I can't feel your pain, or pleasure, or see your colors, or taste what you taste. But none of those things really make any real difference because it's what we say about them. And the grammar, as he says, like I said, he has a more expansive use of the term grammar. The rules of the language involved in this, it's how we talk about it that really makes any, that's what matters. And so he says, if we can construe the grammar of the expression of sensation on the model of object and name, like the object, like pain or something, the object drops out of consideration as completely irrelevant. Doesn't even matter what it is. It's what we say that really makes any difference. And in fact, he goes further and says, pain behavior can point to a painful place, but the subject of pain is the person who gives it expression. Yeah, look, point to your pain, so you fall and hurt your knee. And so you point to your knee and you're like, I have pain in my knee. That's not really true. The injury is in your knee. The pain is not in your knee. That's where your knee is what got injured. You, the subject, the person speaking, you're the one in pain. It's not an object. It's not even a painful place. You are in pain. Yes, the injury is on your knee, but the pain is yours. It's part of your experience. It's not an object at all. Again, kind of going back to the idea that meaning is reference. No, there's no object. You're just expressing yourself. Okay, so he says, I believe he is in pain. I know I am. Philosophically, this might seem more appropriate, but just try to doubt someone else's fear or pain. By the way, fear is another one that you can't easily doubt. All right. I'm going to read this last little section and try to summarize here. All right, so this is on. Sorry. It is number, not page, number 307 and 308. Okay, so this is in quotes again. In other words, he's talking to somebody else. Okay, in quotes. Are you not really a behaviorist in disguise? Aren't you at bottom really saying that everything except human behavior is a fiction? So somebody might say this to them, unquote. A behaviorist, by the way, is someone that believes that there are no such thing as mental states and everything should be, it's really a psychological theory, not a philosophical one like psychology. Behaviorism is a psychology idea that your behavior is what should be. Forget about your mind. It's all about your behavior. All right. So in response to this, if I do speak of a fiction, then it is of a grammatical fiction. Grammar again. How does the philosophical problem of mental processes and states and about behaviorism arise? The first step is the one that altogether escapes notice. We talk about processes and states and leave their nature undecided. Sometime, perhaps, we shall know more about them, we think, but that is just what commits us to a particular way of looking at the matter. For we have a definite concept of what it means to learn to know a process better. He says the decisive movement in the conjuring trick has been made, and it was the very one that we thought quite innocent. And now the analogy which was to make us understand our thoughts falls to pieces. So we have to deny the yet uncomprehended process in the yet unexplored medium, that is the thought in your mind. And now it looks as if we had denied mental processes. And naturally, we don't want to deny them. What is your aim in philosophy? To show the fly the way out of the fly bottle. Okay. All right. I'm going to try to summarize this way. Okay. So if all thought is in language and language is in its essence public, there is no such thing as having some isolated idea in your mind that no one knows about. Well, at least no one can know about. Of course, you could have private thoughts, but they could be expressed. But more importantly, you couldn't have them in the first place if you hadn't learned language, which is a public. You learn that from others in society, in a form of life, in activities or in activities. Thought is something that you're even you need others and to be in a world to achieve. You can't have thoughts without that. And therefore, the idea that Descartes put forward, which is still really has a lot of prevalence in philosophy, that I'm alone with my mind and my ideas isolated from the world, and I'm trying to figure out how my ideas are going to connect up with the world, and how am I going to get out of my own mind and figure and connect up with the rest of reality. Wittgenstein is like, that doesn't make any freaking sense at all. You wouldn't even have ideas if you were not already in the world with other people, because you couldn't think. Language comes from context, others, forms of life. It's the wrong picture, right? That's what he was talking about, the conjuring trick. We picture this in the wrong way, and it leads us into the wrong understanding of the situation that we're in. And when we unravel that picture and look at it in a different way, the way he's trying to present, then we understand how to get out of this philosophical quandary that we found ourselves in. We find the way, the fly, that's us, the fly finds the way out of the fly bottle, and we realize it's not really a problem in the first place. We just we were misunderstanding the whole thing. This is why he said that philosophical treatment is like the treatment of a disease. You cure it. You don't really solve it. You cure the misunderstanding that's led you into this false way of looking at matters. All right. I hope this all makes sense and helps you out. Thank you. Have a good evening.